Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me here today. Let's start. So in either the visual or sonic aspects, are loudspeakers disturbing or otherwise distracting simply a necessary part of the performance, or do they deliver a positive quality on their own in a concert situations? So as usual with art-related questions such as this, there is no straightforward answer. Instead, there will be different views which heavily depend on the artistic perspective of either each composer, artist, or audiences about the usage of anything but only natural acoustics in concerts or similar situations. Therefore, it's not expected with this presentation to find a clear answer, but instead to consider different subjective approaches which can lead to different aesthetic positions. Thus, I'll focus on different perspectives of how to answer this question, giving also a hint of how I stand on the subject, making it clear that due to my activities with sound and loudspeakers, my view considers not only concert situations but also audiovisual installations. Possibly the question for this presentation is more related to acousmatic music than to other types of electroacoustic music, as the absence of any sound source but the speakers makes them the more noticeable, both visually and sonically. Therefore, let us have a view about what acousmatic means. From the Greek word akousma, which means oral cognition, and kosmataki, that can designate either the organ of hearing, the act of hearing itself, or the sound that is heard. And according to the Electroacoustic Resource Site Project Ears from Lilandi, so the word acousmatic was first used by ancient Greeks and describes an audio-only presentation of sounds free from the distractions of associations with the sound sources. So the term is said to come from the ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras, who offered lectures to his followers from behind the curtain, and he claimed that his followers would listen more closely to the sounds of his voice if they could not see him. Acousmatic music is composed especially for loudspeakers. So in acousmatic concerts, there are no optical impressions. The situation is dedicated to pure hearing and imagining inner sound impressions and sound spaces. The term acousmatic was first used by Pierre Schaeffer, founder of the GRM, Groupe de Recherche Musique Concrète, and as he wrote in his treatise on musical objects. In acousmatic music, what happened here? In acousmatic music, listeners are challenged to distinguish sounds not based on their sound, but by their sonic quality. So in regard to the object we are discussing hereby today, loudspeakers, let us establish from the start that all speakers are transducers. A transducer is any device that converts one form of energy into a readable signal, while the process of converting one form of energy to another is known as transduction. In this image, we have two types of transducer, one that receives and responds to a signal or a stimulus from a physical system, microphone, whilst the other does the opposite, a speaker. So vital to consider to this discussion is that when an audio signal is inside a system in the form of an electrical signal, it requires a transducer to be heard. So loudspeakers are the most common transducer used for this purpose, but not the only ones. More about this later in this presentation. So the next section of this short presentation considers separately the positive and or negative impact of speakers, firstly visually and afterwards sonically. With regard to visual aspects, positive or negative in regard how they are perceived in concert and other situations, this is a very subjective matter. that cannot be, this is a very subjective matter that cannot be answered straightforward with a yes or no. First of all, each member of the audience will surely have their own background of experience in regard to listening to music, from classical music live concerts, popular music, jazz, EDM, or even any type under the umbrella of electroacoustic music. Added to that, audiences from each of these areas will surely have a different answer with regard to the impact of the speakers on visual aspects of performances or concert situations. The answer to this is yet more difficult, as audiences tend to listen to more than one of the aforementioned music genres, so that their experience may be more surely mixed. So another aspect, particular characteristics of speakers, for example. Visual aspects of how loudspeakers may be considered by audiences mostly refer to electroacoustic music performance include size of the speakers, number of speakers in the room, size of the room, distribution in the room, visual aspects of the speakers. In any case, most electroacoustic music concerts featuring acousmatic music, which as defined is only for loudspeakers, happen in darkness or close to it, so that visual aspects of loudspeakers can mostly be an issue by entering the room, but not so much during the concert performance itself. So let us look at different examples. The first one I have here is the Acoustimonium. So in 1974, Francois Bayle introduced the Acoustimonium as an instrument to play acousmatic music in concerts. He described the loudspeakers as a screen onto which sound images could be projected, like visual images onto the big screen of the cinema. So the original concept of Bayle's Acoustimonium is oriented towards the structure of an orchestra. The loudspeakers were on a stage in front of the audience, and the timbre of the speakers was comparable to orchestral instruments. To date, there are several types of Acoustimoniums with either different or similar approaches. One of them is Musique and Recherche Acoustimonium, initiated by Annette van der Gorne, with an analog and MIDI board with 60 specialization tracks and 80 loudspeakers. It is flexible and therefore not limited to a particular venue. It can be adapted for different venues. A similar example is the BEAST, Birmingham Electroacoustic Sound Theatre at the University of Birmingham, founded in 1982 by John T. Harrison and since 2014 under the direction of Scott Wilson. Both the BEAST and the Musique and Recherche Acoustimonium share the characteristic that they can be installed in any appropriate venue. Second example I have here is the Clan Dome at the Cubus at ZKM. This is a rather small high-density loudspeaker array, HDLA, of circa 47 speakers with a dome-like form, semi-spherical, and it uses 4 rings at different heights, Meya sound speakers, most of which are model 33 UPJ1. Although entering the hall, audiences not familiar with the room may be surprised by the amount of speakers. At different levels inside the room, the static view of its wooden walls, and moreover, with acousmatic concerts happening normally in the dark, the Clan Dome offers a pleasant presentation of small lights of the speakers when the room's lights are off. So that, always considering that this is indeed a very subjective matter, audiences may consider this pleasant instead of disturbing, although it could be visually disturbing or distracting. So another example I have here is the ICEM, the New York Electroacoustic Music Festival, presented acousmatic concert between 2014 and 2018 at the Experimental Theater at Eros Art Center, a concert hall for 16.2 specialization via 2 rings of Genelex 1840s. As the photo shows, the disposition and presentation of the speakers is not quite tidy as that of the Clarendon. However, as concerts were always in the dark, so that this was not a visual issue, as you can see in the right side of the picture. So there was always in the dark during the concert. Whilst the examples such as the Beast and the Musical Recherche Acoustimonium are mostly or only used in concert situations, examples such as the immersive lab at the ICST in Zurich are more likely to be used for installations. So the immersive lab consists of a panoramic video made by 4 video screens arranged in a cylindrical form. The audio consists of 16 loudspeakers, Meya Sound MM4XP, and 2 subwoofers arranged behind the screens in 2 levels. You can see in the picture the screens are behind here, behind the screens. So the visual aspects of the speakers is not quite relevant here, as they are rather hidden, as you can see in the picture. The space is conceived not only for sound, but as an audiovisual immersive space, which integrates sound, visual, and touch in a unique single space. There are other examples of installations in galleries, museums, and other types of situations in different spaces. These 2 examples, on the left side, Wins, I don't know how to pronounce the name, I'm sorry, Wins installation at the Beaconsfield Gallery, and on the right side, Parrenos installation at the Tate Modern, both in London. In both cases, loudspeakers are part of the installation as an object, in one more obvious than the other, but none of these installations hide the speakers. On the contrary, they are visually an important part of the entire work. I have in my own installations a different approach. So this is a picture of my light and sound installation reflection in sync, out of sync, which also uses the Meya Sound MM4XP in 1 ring and 2 subwoofers. This is a picture of a recent presentation in Bonn. And as you can see in the picture, speakers are not directly visible, but disguised with lightning. So in the next 2 pictures, you can see the speakers installed in the space. But, again, as I mentioned before, they are hidden by the light and visitors concentrate on the sound and not on the loudspeakers themselves. This is another example of my own work, Web Mindscape, also for 8 audio channels at St. Gertrude Church in Cologne. And as you can see in the picture, the visual part is concentrated on the light and architecture. Sound is an equal part of the installation, but its source is intentionally hidden in the space. Now with regard to the sonic aspects. Apart from this aspect being again very subjective and depending mostly upon the background of each member of the audience, whether with positive or negative impact, there are genres of music such as acousmatic which fully depend on presence of loudspeakers for a concert to take place. Hence, the question here would be more likely to be, if listening to music only via loudspeakers can be disturbing or distracting or both, and not if the object from where music sound source emanates are sonically disturbing or distracting. So another aspect would be different types of listening to sound via different transducers. Although all loudspeakers are transducers, not all transducers are loudspeakers, whereby there are also other types, for example, contact ones, tactile transducer, and others, which amplify, can be placed against placed and against diverse surfaces which can act as resonators. Although there is a common usage of them in installation, it is not unthinkable to use many dispersed in the room and walls within a concert hall to carry sound in different areas with different types of specialization. The advantage of these transducers is that they are rather small and may not be easily seen in the concert hall or can be easily hidden. However, the disadvantage is that their sound is normally of rather low quality and cannot be very loud, although this depends on several factors, such as their size, the power of the amplifier used, and also the potential or not of the surface amplifying and resonating the signals. Generally, however, they don't reach the quality of good speakers in regard to frequency and amplitude definition. So many aspects considered for the visual impact of speakers can be considered for the sonic aspects as well, namely size. Small speakers may not be powerful enough for big halls, but on the other hand, very big speakers, normally providing plenty of power in rather small areas, may be listened to as too loud apart from being too visible. So the left picture is the Blow. This is the Acoustimonium, the Bremer Orchestra loudspeakers at the museum, Gerhard Marke Museum last year. Just to clarify this. However, very small speakers, such as the Maya Sound MM4XP, are much louder than one would expect and can be used effectively for rather big rooms. Another aspect would be number of speakers and localizations. In the last 50 years, electroacoustic music has gone from stereo to big arrays of speakers, some containing up to 250 speakers. Whilst in some cases, so many are required for special acoustical reasons, for example, for the wave field synthesis YFS, in other cases, such a large amount of speakers in a concert hall with several rings in different heights are special for the specialization of acousmatic music, such as with ambisonic of similar techniques. Big arrays of speakers with different heights may be visually distracting, but are sonically very effective in most cases, and cannot be replaced with any other type of transducer. Regardless of the type of system used for localization and spatialization of sound in multi-channel settings, they all work mostly in concert situations without loudspeakers. So that whether they disturb or distract is irrelevant there hereby, as without them, the task cannot be accomplished. So type of situation, another aspect, the type of situation. Again, concert situation may not be the only considered hereby, as I have examples of my own work I have already shown. And other than the formal examples I already mentioned for my work, Lieken is another installation I created in 2019 at the Immersive Lab in Zurich, which makes usage of 16 loudspeakers in 2 rings controlled by ambisonics with Max. I also use in this installation a tactile transducer, but mostly to send low frequencies to be felt in the visitor's body. Like all works of my authorship shown in this presentation, Lieken requires immersive specialized sound, which is therefore an integral part of my artistic work both in acousmatic, audiovisual compositions, and also for interactive installations. Regardless of the specific technique for the specialization, the very conception of the works require the usage of loudspeakers, without which such concept could not be achieved. So to conclude, this presentation has touched briefly on different aspects of how visually and sonically loudspeakers may be disturbing, distracting, or not. Generally speaking, the examples shown in this presentation are enough to have a glimpse of not only how subjective the answer to the main question is, but also that there are maybe too many different situations which are impossible to be contemplated from the same perspective, and therefore a matter that cannot be confronted with a simple binary yes-no approach. So now let's start an open discussion and then to hear everyone in which everyone participates. Thank you.
I'm moving to the center simply so that Andre can see me in the camera. Can't get enough of my face. Claudia, that was great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I've got a bunch of things which I could speak to, but of course, as always, I first open up the room to questions. Does anyone have any questions or responses to this fascinating talk?
Oh, why not? I think related to the original question, whether or not loudspeakers are disturbing, I mean, not that I want to get into this categorization again that I mentioned yesterday, but I think it is important to make a distinction between the idea of loudspeakers creating some kind of immersive situation, so with ambisonics or wave fields, where you could say that the individual loudspeaker doesn't play an important role. For instance, in the Acoustimonium, I mean now the Paris Acoustimonium, not so much the Beast, but where you see that the loudspeaker is really a character. So it is not only emphasized by the way that they present the Acoustimonium with putting spots on the speakers, but these speakers are also really pieces of design. They look very different. So they are deliberately giving you the idea that you are surrounded by different characters. This is also the idea of the way that they work with the Acoustimonium. So to present sounds at certain moments in your piece, all specific speakers that emphasize certain qualities of the sounds at that very moment. And there, I think the approach to the loudspeaker is very different than when you use loudspeakers only to create this kind of imaginary space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you spoke to this very much
yes, there are
in the talk, didn't you? For anyone
exactly.
who's unclear about that, it really is about.
I'm sure that you spoke about it.
Yeah.
I was saying that the question whether or not loudspeakers are disturbing is maybe the answer to that question is different when you look at these two categories.
Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. It's not just then a question of whether the loudspeaker is visible, but whether it's actually audible in its particular characteristics. Because if you're using loudspeakers in an Acoustimonium setting, you're actually using them to a certain extent as filters. Because you don't just use very expensive speakers in an Acoustimonium. Some might be very expensive, very high quality. Some might be just hi-fi speakers costing €50, and you use the characteristics of those speakers. Please.
Yeah, but the question is not only disturbing or pleasant; it's also distracting.
Yeah.
And that's very subjective, as Claudia said, because people that do not have an experience on that may actually be fascinated by the piece and how it flows and forget about listening to the music. And that happened to me, even though I haven't familiar with that, because it's so nice to see all the kind of things that are happening there. So the distraction part is also very important, because it goes actually against the objective of actually listening to the music when you are actually visually distracted by that. And so the design of the speakers, the Acoustimonium also can be very attractive visually, and then you forget about doing that. So disturbing is one thing, distracting is another thing, and they're both more or less put in this context.
But in that case, they're not probably more distracting than, say, performers on stage.
That's exactly what I wanted to say.
Exactly.
There's an interesting research carried out already in 1948, I think, at Philips in the Netherlands, where it was called multiplication of concerts. And it was basically a continuation of this Philadelphia, whatever experiment it was with Stokowski in the 30s in the United States. So there was a concert taking place in the hall. There were high-quality microphones. I mean, this is 1948, and there were loudspeakers in another hall where an audience was listening to the same concert, and then they were questioned about how they experienced this. And it was almost 50-50 that there were people who missed the performance, and there were people who said, actually, I liked the fact that the performers weren't there because I could concentrate on the music content.
That's impressive.
That's really there's an extensive report about that research in English and in versus online, I guess.
Right. Yeah, please do. That would be really interesting to see. It reminds me a little. It reminds me a little bit of something which was which arose in my mind during one of the discussions yesterday. That there seems to be evidence that performers respond differently to the recording situation. And at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a rise in the use of vibrato, particularly amongst string players, when they were actually standing in front of a primitive microphone. They had no audience, and so they somehow exaggerated certain aspects of their performance to sort of make up for the lack of expressive power that they felt they had without an audience. There's kind of bizarre reactions to technology.
And one last little remark about the Acoustimonium and the visual aspects of it. This was a deliberate choice because of the missing visual aspect of performance.
I want to come to that, but I think first we have to look at Martin.
So, thank you very much. I have a personal question about your experience, because you have kind of a so heterogeneous and large production of that kind. So, what is your experience, your feedback that you have for your settings, and how the setting of loudspeakers influence your composition? Because I think this is part of the discussion. So how the fact that we know how the loudspeakers are set influence the way we are dealing with the sounds and the choreography or dramaturgy of the piece.
I think it depends. I mean, for example, in the space, like the immersive lab in Zurich, it is very clear that I have to work with the space, with the speakers and the system they have. So I have to create a piece for the space with this system. Yeah, then it's influenced my work for sure. In other cases, for example, in installation, I know I have this. I create this for the space, the in situ. Yeah, and it's more the space that influences my work and not the opposite. Anyway, I have a previous idea what I want. And it changed with the architecture and this, but not really for the speaker, the setting of the speakers.
Can we say that sometimes, so maybe the question is if the loudspeakers are to be treated as an instrument, so as...
Sorry, so could you please...
So can we imagine that the loudspeakers are in our imagination like instruments, so we deal with them as we are composing for a violin or for a piano. So if they are our mindset, it might be taking consideration loudspeaker not as an object, as a simple tool, but really as an instrument, and how it changed our doing.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I would say very, very strongly. It's a cop-out, I know, but yes and no. Yes, because very much you're composing for the capabilities of loudspeakers. Yeah, you're working with a dynamic range which you know is available to you on that instrument, and you're composing very much for the frequency range that instrument can offer you. But on the other hand, very much no, because it's not something you touch. And I think the haptic experience of engaging with an instrument bodily, is simply missing when it comes to, should be missing, you shouldn't be touching loudspeakers. So of course it's not an instrument in the sense that a viola is an instrument.
Oh, but you don't touch the strings of a piano, which is the vibrating part.
Well, you touch the keys.
Well, you touch the mixing this. With the loudspeaker, so.
Not necessarily, yeah. I mean,
well, you can.
Plenty of people had their pieces performed yesterday without. Sorry. Who was first, Maya or Barbara?
Sorry?
I didn't see. Go, Maya.
Yeah, no, the biggest difference is, of course, that an instrumentalist is another person that speaks back to you and changes the music to a much deeper degree than a loudspeaker which would filter it. So there is an interaction there that can't be compared to writing to speakers.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that the presence of loudspeakers in a way has as an effect that the players, in case both are there, players and speakers, are cut off the result, the sonic result, because usually when we play, like every piece, but also last week in your piece, as we are also amplified, the microphones have to kept off the loudspeaker result situation, so we are the only ones, the players, who don't hear the result anymore, which makes a kind of alienation also, and which maybe sometimes explains the not so positive attitude. Because you feel like you were in another room, and in fact, acoustically, we are then in another room. That's why, I mean, for a player, the presence of loudspeakers disturbs the routine of the situation on stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole area of loudspeakers in combination with instruments is huge. We should go in there. I've got several stories to tell about that. I won't bore you too much, but I remember hearing a concert at a festival I was at where Michael Nyman was playing, and the person on the mixing desk was clearly deaf. It was an appalling sound image which was being created. I mean, I even went over to the desk in the interval and looked and could see the violins were plus, I had EQ settings at plus 18 dB at 2.5 kilohertz, you know, it's like, whoa, it was horrible. And I was staying at the same hotel as him, and I saw them all come in late in the evening, actually it was about 2 in the morning, and we were all in the bar, and I was fighting with myself whether I should say something or not. And I thought, damn it, I'm going to say something, because these instrumentalists are fantastic. Top London session guys, really amazing musicians, and they were being represented appallingly through the loudspeakers. So I went and had a talk about it, and I basically said, you know, I think you should step down from the stage, Mr. Nyman, and go and hear what your music sounds like and what your musicians sound like, because they're actually being destroyed. Their careers are being destroyed, their reputations are being destroyed by whoever's on the mixing desk. And then he called over, hey, John. John was at the bar, the mixing engineer, that they brought out from London to do that. And I, you know, spoke a little bit with him, he defended himself. It turned out he wasn't even on the mixing desk. He just showed the local guy what to do, and then went for a drink. It was a terrible, terrible situation. There's another situation where I was working with a pianist who played here a few years ago, Per Lundberg, and I'd done a couple of performances with him with electronics before he told me, you know what, Michael, I really hate playing with amplification. But I've been amplifying massively in our performances. Well, why didn't you tell me what's going on? And he said, well, look, you know, part of my training as a pianist was to learn how to project my sound into the concert hall. And as soon as you put a microphone on the piano and amplify me on speakers, I'm cut out of that equation. And so this is a really difficult situation for working situations between composers, sound engineers and musicians on stage, and it really needs to be looked into and thought about very carefully. Now I really believe, I love amplification, you know, Barbara, but I sincerely believe that there has to be more investment on composers' part and instrumentalists' part to give back some of the responsibility for the sound production to the musicians who are performing your music. That means giving them systems which they feel attracted to, investing time into, and actually retaking responsibility for their sound deeply.
Was ich fragen möchte, ist jetzt ganz schnell, Michael Nyman, Entschuldigung, das interessiert mich jetzt schon, weil ich den auch mal kennengelernt habe. Aber er muss das doch gehört haben, diese 18 dB plus. Er muss doch reagiert haben, weil seine Komposition in einem völlig anderen Spektrum plötzlich erscheint.
He was on stage. He was on stage playing the piano. That's which is why I said to him, you really should step down off stage, go into the audience and have a listen, because it was things like, you know, there's a baritone sax solo starting. Oh, but 6 seconds later, someone finds the right fader. And all of a sudden, I mean, it was appalling. I've never heard such bad sound.
But is that so different from playing trombone and orchestra, for instance?
I mean, is it different from playing trombone and orchestra?
What you were saying about being cut off from the sound as it is heard in the hall. I mean, if you are playing trombone in the orchestra, you don't have an image of the orchestra as a whole, as the way that you, the listener in the whole hears it.
But then, yeah, there's some truth in that, and is it not the case, in fact, that most orchestral musicians take less responsibility for the performance of the music than chamber musicians?
That's absolutely true, of course.
Yeah. Barbara.
Yeah, I think you're right on one hand. On the other hand, there's a difference because the trombone has a maximum and the loudspeaker theoretically does not have. So you are always in a kind of when it feels.
There is of course a conductor in the orchestra who keeps an eye on the complete thing.
Yes, of course. But not everybody wants to play an orchestra too.
Martha.
No, I think this is an incredibly interesting point because maybe it's part of the education that instrumentalists might have to have this training as a pianist to project the sound to work with electronic. It's something not as it's just like now it's with microphone without microphones. It's the same. It's really a training. It happened also to me to work with musicians and say there was a, for example, singer. I have a problem with mouth more, it's this or that, so they are involved in the process, even without having the direct feedback. They are used to work with electronic, and so they are able to interact, to change their attitude and their performance because there is the electronic. And I think this is pretty much part of the curriculum of the musician to be trained also. If we want the electronic music.
But before then, I think the composers have to be trained to think about these relationships, and that's something that John Croft, the New Zealand but British-based composer, is pleading for in some of his writings, that you provide effects which react audibly to certain playing techniques, so that if you add more overtones by playing nearest the bridge on the viola, then you hear an effect in the sound. The ring modulation is faster, or a filter opens up or something, so that you actually, through the system you provide, invite the musician to create a hybrid instrument through the act of playing the instrument. Yeah, that's one approach which I think we could, as people working on instrumental plus electronics, music that for those combinations could actually develop more. I mean, and I'm guilty of it as much as anyone. I've not done it nearly as much as I want to. I hope I get better. Were there any more comments there? Because if not, I think we should just brief
maybe just one anecdote, because I think all of us we agree that loudspeakers in some situations are really inevitable, because if they weren't there, you wouldn't hear anything. And but this is not true for everybody, actually. As I had to do some sound installations on the Expo 2000 that happened in Hanover, and I was working together with architects. And if you put such a thing in their nicely designed architecture, they get crazy. And what they did is they put loudspeakers behind walls. Because it was distracting and disturbing. It took me quite some time to convince them that if they want anything of my work there, it must be with loudspeakers, and they must be in the room where it should be heard. And it really took time. I couldn't believe it was so normal for everybody. You hear music from speakers, so the speakers have to be somewhere. No, not for that. So it's just what we think is normal for some people just isn't. Needs really a talking on that issue. Yeah. It's the same like if you have architects and they build nice rooms, and then you go into the room and they are acoustically not useful because nobody thought about it. Yeah. And you cannot rooms that should be okay for people to meet there and talk, and they cannot just talk because it's over acoustics and it's nice glass walls and all that stuff that really looks shiny and beautiful, but it's just unusable, makes the room unusable. Yeah. So like our Sana building, somebody may know it, a big piece of art that is part of our university on the Zeche Zollverein. It's really beautiful. It's really a beautiful building. It's a fascinating piece of architecture, but for practical use, it's almost unusable.
Yeah. The same can be said, though, I think, for musicians' sensitivity to the visual aspect of their staging. How many times have you done a concert where there are just cables everywhere? You know, it's not just a death trap. It looks horrible. And anyone with any sense for visual design must look at the stage and go, I can't believe what I'm seeing. You know, they desperately need someone to take care of their visuals. But that's the way it goes. Just to go back briefly to this question of the Acoustimonium, and to make it maybe really clear, the difference is, of course, whether the loudspeaker disappears or is really present, not just sonically but also visually. And that's the point that Claudia made and Kate also made. That the visual aspect of the Acoustimonium on stage is something that's really important. And it's totally different to an installation of speakers, an immersive installation of all the same speaker types. You know, where you're not supposed to be looking at the speaker, and you're not supposed to have any difference in the frequency response to the speaker. Not supposed to, because they're all the same. When it comes to the Acoustimonium, though, it's really interesting to see that it's called an orchestra of loudspeakers. And you made this point very clearly that in some respects it's visually an orchestra. They are on stage. It's not generally a surround situation. You might have 80 loudspeakers, but they're all in front, which is kind of weird for people that do immersive sound, with loudspeakers all around. But it's about that image and connecting to that image of the orchestra on stage. And I find that really fascinating because it speaks to one of the big mistakes, I think, which people who really love loudspeaker music, tape music, made in the early days, which was to essentially cut the connection to the musical infrastructure that was already existing and had been existing and developed over hundreds of years, which is with other human beings, musicians, playing acoustic instruments. And whether you think you're there purely for the sound or not, you have a visual and social connection in the concert hall. And to simply say, to walk up and say, well, we're done with that now. Don't need you anymore, thank you very much, you can all go home. We now have loudspeakers. That was guaranteed, in my view, to lose a huge swathe of the audience. That very, very step. And the move of several people with Acoustimonium type installations was an attempt to reconnect to an audience which I think for several years had been lost. Now, I know that's a provocative statement, especially from someone who's a practitioner of electronic music, but I don't know how you feel about that. It was revealed to me by working in industry how important it is to keep this link, and I connected it back to loudspeaker.
Ich glaube, wenn Richard Wagner sein Orchester in einem tiefen Graben versteckt, dann hat das auch den Grund, die Technik der Musikerzeugung zu verstecken, dann bekommt das einen liturgischen oder einen pseudo-metaphysischen Aspekt. Und vielleicht existiert etwas Ähnliches in dem Moment, wir haben das Konzert vor ein paar Tagen erlebt, wo die Technik eigentlich versteckt wurde und gleichzeitig so eine Art von metaphysischer Überhöhung existiert. Wenn man die Absicht hat, dann dürfen die Herstellungsmethoden nicht offenbart werden. Ich glaube, das hat eine Verbindung.
Ja, kann ich verstehen.
Art is large. Any technology that is sufficiently complex is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
So, any other comments or questions? We've got another 5 minutes if we want to go any further with this. I would ask the question, put into the room the question of how people feel about, for instance, the ZKM solution of lights on loudspeakers, adding a visual element. Does anyone? Yeah. It's not here actually. He should be here. He's on his way.
I completely hate it because the idea of the Klangdome is exactly not to be an Acoustimonium. It's the visual aspect of the speakers, because they're all the same speakers and they are in a surround thing, and something to get some kind of immersive audio, and this is something where you really don't want to know where the speakers are. I just don't want to know it, and you don't want to know what kind of speaker it is, as opposed to the Acoustimonium. And there you would rather like to have something that is like some spatial audio software that uses the speakers to place some virtual sound source somewhere in space and use the speakers to project it to me. I don't want to care about the speakers. So I really find it disturbing to ridiculous to have those lights in
the stars.
You could make a special piece where you highlight speakers where sound is not coming from.
Or maybe it was just too burst with this tone, you know, that you need light and you use, you know, speaker was not. So you can, if there are lights or not, if they are equal, you erase the fact that he's kind of pointing out loudspeaker, but it's just a light coming from somewhere. That is my.
I wanted to come back to the subject of subjectivity and cultural background there. Because we are specialists, and you may hate it, I may not hate it, but we are all in the same kind of, we know what is going on there. But at the same time, there are a lot of people that go there for a concert that may not have any idea of what is going on there. And the complete darkness may actually disorient completely. And the lights there may actually make a connection at some point. So everybody is different, and I think that it's a commercial aspect there that may be considered to get more people into the concert room as well, because the visual is interesting, like Christmas lights.
You get more people in the Klangdome when you have those lights blinking?
No, I have projected my music there with only blue lights there, for example, not blinking, but only blue lights everywhere on all 47 speakers. I wanted completely darkness there, so it was having little stars in the dome there everywhere. But it didn't distract me. I found it quite pleasant to see those little lights there. No?
It's an important point, that you do sometimes have to reach out to your audience, or you should at least consider it. Maybe not in the musical aesthetic, but in little touches like that, I suppose.
Oh, well, I mean, I always ask myself why it would be necessary to make the whole dark in the first place. But another point, an observation from the concert yesterday, the piece that I played there at the 1 o'clock concert was meant for 8 loudspeakers. And there was no panning, nothing. There are only sounds on, on discrete positions. Played in an episodic system where these 8 positions were basically simulated. And I noticed that let's say, immersiveness of the sound was enhanced by the episodic situation, but the exact location of the sound, that is, let's say, character of the sound coming really from one loudspeaker was lost. And I have mixed feelings about it.
I completely understand that. I mean, and this speaks to the idea of whether a loudspeaker is an instrument of sorts. If you can actually localize really directly to that loudspeaker, and if it has special characteristics, then you can really have a different experience when it's supposed to disappear.
Especially with impulse-like sound, they really come from a speaker from a specific form of space that is
the same feeling.
I have that exact impression with the Monophonic Line, which is the same as Brian Saturday, when it was played about 10 years ago in Musikfabrik. And they used Anisonic. That was the first time I heard that it was Anisonic. And I couldn't hear the real spatialization that I actually composed into the part. Because the sound was everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
I mean, if you don't compose for ambisonics, then it's maybe not a great idea to actually diffuse over ambisonics.
Well, that was the setup that they have for a big festival. That was a bit of a problem.
What we often hear was either or. You know, we've got, you can use all 16 loudspeakers, or you can use all 16 with ambisonics. That was our solution. But of course, then you have problems when some people have a very specific idea of 8-channel, but it's pairwise, 2, 4, 6, 8. That we don't have. We just have 2, 4, 6, and then something up above. You know, it's difficult.
This is a a specific problem of ambisonics, because ambisonics just enlarges the area where you could imagine the sound source came from. I remember when Johnny Harrison was here and he presented in our studio an ambisonic piece for the first time, and he had a recording of a bee flying through the studio somehow, and that was such a bee.
Yeah.
It was like that. And it's much different from spatial soundwave systems or something where you could really spot the sound source much better than ambisonics.
I think Jonty's solution is to use a hybrid system of ambisonics and individual channels routed direct to speakers. That's another possibility, but then you've really got to be at least in the room for a significant amount of time to work with it.
Yeah.
Not just 20 minutes like you've got during a 3-day symposium like this. I propose we stop there if that's okay. And the next talk is you two, yeah? The next one will actually be in German, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I have an handout.
Okay, in English.
Yes.
Yeah. So apologies if for those who don't speak German, but the next one will be in German. But again, thank you, Claudia.
Thank
That
you,
was
Michael.
fantastic.